It's something that is deeply personal and very special to me. So if you'll allow me for just a brief minute, let me give you just a little background, and then let me share the information that was shared with the students. My father, Staff Sergeant Benjamin F. Smith, passed away in 2000, the year 2000. He's buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., a place that's reserved for very special people, people who are willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice. I still remember when he was passing away, and I briefly alluded to this. My father was a war veteran, and the conflicts were Korea and Vietnam. And I remember the thing he said to me. He woke up, and he was about to draw his last breath, and he looked at me, and he said, "Robert, I'm sorry." And I said, "Dad, what are you sorry about?" He said, "We didn't finish the job. We didn't finish the job. We should have finished in Korea, but we did not. And now, I not only pass that on to you, my generation, but we pass it on to my grandchildren. We passed it on to the generation that you see on the stage, and you're seeing so eloquently performing this afternoon." And as I shared with the students, one of the reasons I programmed this is not only in honor of my father, but to make sure they're very aware, because my dad was absolutely right. This is poetic and prophetic words in the year 2000, and here it is 16 years later, and we're still dealing with this every single day. They're back in the news this week. I know you all know exactly what I'm talking about. We didn't finish the job. In the year 2000, my dad passed away in April. He was interred at Arlington on May the 4th, 2000, year 2000. I was programming a concert for Veterans Day that fall. And the plan was to honor all of our veterans from all the different campaigns and generations. You know, it was really easy to find things about World War II, the greatest generation. That was really easy. It was easy to find things for all of the conflicts, but I got to tell you, other than one simple little march called the Korean War Veterans March, there was nothing about that Korean conflict. And the musical repertoire validated the point that it was the forgotten conflict. And I had to remind the students, or actually educate them, and I remind you, those of you of a certain age in the audience, we never, other than a ceasefire, we're still technically at war. We never resolved that. It's forgotten. With that said, I shared a history lesson. I'm going to do a brief version with you. July of 1950, the North Koreans invaded South Korea. Invasion. And the United Nations got together and said, "This isn't okay. You have to stop. You need to go back." They would not. The United Nations got together and they amassed a force of many nations. Specifically, though, at the time this was launched, it was the United States and Australia. And on September the 15th, there was a strategic action. It was under the strategic leadership of General Douglas MacArthur, who was still the Allied commander in post-World War II. He knew the region better than anybody. So he conceived of an invasion on a beach called Inchon. Inchon today, by the way, is in Seoul. It's the beach there, and it's where, in fact, it's called the Inchon International Airport. Anybody may have been to Korea. It's the Inchon International Airport. So on the morning of September 15th, just before dawn, a fleet of ships, American and Australian ships, appeared just over the horizon. On that ships were helicopters, and this was the very first amphibious invasion in our military history. The United States Marines got into those helicopters, and those helicopters lifted off the ship, and they went to the shore, and they landed on hill number 812, and the invasion was underway. Now, if you could imagine maybe being a Korean child and maybe on the beach in this really beautiful atmosphere, maybe playing your flute, and then hearing the sounds of these mechanical birds, these monsters that were flying towards the shore. It was a very, very frightening experience. The Inchon invasion, by the way, was very successful. It was strategically a masterpiece. And we went for 3 years following that. Now, the invasion itself, those Marines dropped off by the helicopters, they made it back, they were picked up, they made it back to the ships. It was a very successful event. The point of this piece that you're about to hear, as I told the students, is that it's sometimes we're speaking the same thing, but we don't understand each other's language. And thus we think there's a conflict when we're all humans, and we're actually saying the exact same thing. I pointed out areas in the music here where the lines are exactly the same. It's just one's in an Asian language and the other one is more in a Western language. And I broke it down for them so they could hear that, wait a minute, you didn't recognize this was the exact same music. It's just in two different languages. And there is a metaphor for us that we all need to learn to listen to each other, in my opinion. Very, very, very important. Those Marines made it back, and then the conflict lasted for an additional 3 years. I shared with them, my father was at the beginning of the conflict. If you go and look in your history books, in 1953, there was a meeting at the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, and the North Koreans came down, the Americans, the South Koreans came up, and they had an exchange of prisoners. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Do you remember this at all? It is in your history books. I want you to look at those photographs. I want you to look at General Douglas MacArthur standing there. There he is in his cap and his aviator glasses, okay? And looking like MacArthur would look. But if you look just to his right, our left as we're looking, there's a young MP that is there. That's my Uncle Jesse, my mom's brother. This was an amazing historical event. My dad was there at the beginning. My uncle was there at the prisoner exchange. And one of the most treasured items I have was my uncle at 80 years old saying, here, Robert, you need these pictures. And he gave me the pictures from that day. And I actually have those historic photographs, the original prints, the ones that actually you see in your history books. Very fascinating. With that in mind, are there any Korean vets or Vietnam vets in the audience that served with my father? If you would you please stand? Anybody here? Not a single one. No? Oh, we've got one right here.